Terrible news this morning, waking up to the news that 49 people have been killed dead by a Nazi terror attack in New Zealand. These poor people were shot down while at Friday prayers. Australian Nazi Brenton Tarrant wrote a manifesto before he live streamed his shooting down of these innocent people. In his manifesto, he praises Anders Behring Breivik, the Norwegian Nazi who gunned down left-wing young people. The death toll would have been even higher if his explosives had gone off. He started with threats to Muslims on Facebook. Hate speech, hate speech, hate speech, until he got the bravery to act on his hateful ideas. This is where the idea of free speech for fascists leads. There is no moral equivalence between one side of a debate saying we want genocide and another side of the debate, the majority of people saying genocide never again. And what about the free speech of Muslims, brown people, the left and trade unions who wake up this morning in New Zealand feeling afraid that some scumbag Nazi might machine gun them down? People who are afraid to leave their houses this morning. Their freedom of speech has been curtailed by these Nazi terrorist scumbags. When the far right grow, they begin to act. Their ambition is to uproot all vestige of democracy, to destroy the left, to murder minorities. It's suicide to not realise that. And if you want to defend freedom of speech, if you want to defend democracy, these people have to be shut down. But the growth of the far right has been fed by the mainstream media and mainstream politicians. Even here in Ireland, we've seen people like Peter Casey point the finger at the travelling community and try and use his bigoted racism to garner some votes. The mainstream media likes to point the finger at Muslims, asylum seekers and at immigrants, as if some poor person living in direct provision on €19 a week is somehow responsible for Johnny Rowan and Sean Fitzpatrick, the bankers and developers, crashing the economy, or for the fact that politicians and parties like Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael bailed out the bankers to the tune of 64 billion. The neoliberal politicians will cut housing, slash our health system, destroy society, and then point the finger at some poor minority. It's a game of mass distraction and no one should fall for it. But Islamophobia has also been grown since the war on terror in 2001. George Bush and Tony Blair wanted to bomb Iraq, get their hands on its oil. They murdered 500,000 people in the process. There was torture centres like Abu Ghraib that gave birth to ISIS, and they justified this slaughter with growing Islamophobia, with the demonisation of Muslim people. The more badly treated you are by the empires, the more they will demonise you. And then when the economic crash came in 2008, sure, Islamophobia was sitting there as a ready-made weapon for papers like the Daily Mail and for right-wing politicians to use to distract people from the fact that they were taking money out of our pockets and giving it to the bankers and developers. But I suppose it's easier to blame a poor person fleeing war and persecution for the housing crisis, even though they've nothing to do with it, then blame French and German banks, or the EU, or our own local politicians. But soft racism feeds hard racism. That's not to say that everyone that says something racist is on the far right. That's not the case. Sometimes people just don't think through what they're saying. But if you say look after our own first, you're calling for an apartheid society with a queue of Irish people for houses and a queue of brown people and minorities. As ludicrous as that is, I mean, which queue does Phil Lynott go in? But a right-wing government that was able to divide people into Irish first and immigrants second, into 2 queues for housing, 2 queues for health, 2 queues for education. Such a right-wing government would be able to smash any movement for housing and everyone would lose out. It's self-defeating and it's stupid. If you want to look after our own, look after the working class in all its shades. If we stand united, we can win housing. If we stand united, we can challenge this system. If we stand divided, we fall. In the wake of the New Zealand terror attacks, we have to renew our commitment to stop the rise of the far right. Whenever they have a public meeting, whenever they have a protest, it needs to be met with counter-protest. To defend freedom of speech, to defend democracy, to defend the lives of migrants and immigrants and minorities. If we let them grow, people die, and we won't let that happen. We need to build a united people power movement to shut down the far right. We need to challenge racism, whether hard or soft racism, when it appears in our workplaces and communities. But finally, we have to challenge a rotten system that denies the majority of people housing, that excludes us from decent healthcare, that treats us as nothing but slaves to generate profits for the rich. We have to challenge that system, take it down and replace it with a socialist society where workers of all colours and creeds can unite, where everyone is housed, where no one goes hungry or homeless,